All right, well, today we are back to work on the No Prep RX7 build, and it is time to get after it. It's time to get the mock-up phase is over. It's time to get the mock-up engine out and get the real engine in and start building the rest of it, so we can get this thing a lot closer to final form. I'm so excited about this now. I'm ready. Now, that being said, I may have lied to you, and I didn't just lie to you, I lied to myself. When I thought that I could build this car, go about this build in a get it done quick, get out there manner. It's just, I thought I could do it. I really, really did. I thought I could just toss it together, basic, simple, relatively budget, and that'd be that. However, 3 seconds into building the dang thing, just seeing an engine in there, a mock-up engine at that, and I am ready to plunge straight down the rabbit hole. I can't do it. It's just, I don't have it in me. I'm not that guy. Like, the thing that drives me with building cars is trying to build better than the last thing, you know, trying to push and learn and progress and trying to build things to the best of our ability. And if we're not going to do it to the best of our ability, I don't want to do it. It's just, you know, that's just where I'm at. It's the reality of it. I lied. Thought I could do it, can't do it. So we are not putting an LS in this thing after all. Instead, we're going to be putting the LT in it from LME. This is the engine we got for the car originally before we went down our detour of the LS, and we even already have a motor plate that I ordered for it. We actually got some other parts, so we're ready. We have everything we need to toss this engine in the car, get it mounted up, and party on. So obviously, going with this engine means we're not going to be going the nitrous route anymore. We're going with a different power adder. Now, we're still kind of going back to plan A, but kind of like a A.2 or A.B, I don't know. An A point something, right? Like, it's going to be a revised version of plan A that I think is going to be better and even give us way more headroom in the power department. And that's really what this boils down to, on top of just wanting to go all out, because that's, you know, rabbit hole. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. The nitrous setup, I do still stand by, would be, I think, the most efficient setup for this car. However, this gives us a lot more headroom in the power department, especially if we still keep a focus on keeping the car as light as possible, which is still going to be the focus. That's where we can make up the most ground, you know, is keeping this thing lightweight. So, yeah, that being said, I am ready to see this engine in here. I mean, we tossed it in here like on the cradle, not even close to in position, and it looked incredible. So to see it like in there, bolted up, hanging out on its own fruition, it's gonna be, I'm ready. I'm ready. So I should quit jibber jabbering so we can get this thing tossed in there. Whew, that's such a nice unit. Let's get to work. Wow, dude, way to break it. Keep her nice and even now. Boom. We got a tool specifically for putting this engine in the car. So we got this sling hoist because we needed to be able to kind of put the engine in where we wanted it with the intake manifold and everything on, so that way we could determine what measurements we needed to make our mid plate. However, that was before we mocked the LS up in there and realized that we could kind of just reuse the mid plate that's there. I mean, we may want to remake it as a whole, but it definitely works and bolts up to an LS bolt pattern on the rear. Now, this bolt pattern is a little bit different, but we know for the most part it'll work and get the engine about where we want it. So the sling isn't 100% necessary, but we got it. We might as well use it. That way we can leave the intake on and kind of find any clearance issues while we're trying to drop this thing in place. All right, well, problem numero uno, LS to LT, is The rear timing cover is a little bit more elaborate on the LT here, and the mid plate is hitting the rear engine cover. So we're gonna have to like cut it around the rear engine cover, basically, more or less. And we've got what's that, 5 out of 6 bell housing bolts line up. On top of the mid plate needing to be trimmed to fit, we also have to trim drastically our motor plate, at least one of them, because it's got to go around the dry sump pump, which this is pretty standard, but we decided to go ahead and make a CAD template, cardboard aided design template, so that way we can make our mistakes on the cardboard and not on the aluminum of the plate, so then we don't have to replace it. So I also wanted to trace out the mid plate and do basically the same thing. That way, you know, if we make any mistakes, if we need to kind of take a risk on a cut or a clearance, you know, it's just cardboard. So using an extended tip marker is the way to get tracing like this, and a nice kind of craft razor knife. I love this thing. I use it all the time. So got the main shape cut out, got the dowels and the 4 bolt holes cut out so that we could line it up and try to get a better idea of what we're going to need to do to clear this plate. I tried installing Allen bolts to see if that would do the trick, and it's close, but they still protrude past the rear block face. So it's not going to do it alone. It might help, but we're going to have to trim around this. There's just no way around it, literally and figuratively. So I got some transfer marks of the holes for the timing cover so I could get an idea of its shape, and I realized it was just going to be easiest to cut out the entire, basically, flex plate perimeter, because it's kind of does 2 things for us. Not only should it hopefully give us clearance on the timing cover, you know, inadvertently, but also it would allow us to pull the engine out without having to take the transmission back, because all we'd have to do is unbolt the torque converter bolts and the flex plate could come out with the engine, mid plate could stay in the car. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal. You know, we get both benefits, and hopefully, you know, having the hole will work for clearing that rear timing cover, the rear engine cover. So to cut this out, there really is no good, easy, simple way to do this with how thick this aluminum is, unless we had an actual mill, which we do not. So we are resorting to the man mill, the hand mill. So I basically got this router, this Milwaukee cordless router. Now this would normally be used for wood, for doing this kind of stuff in wood. However, generally things that work for wood can also work for aluminum in a pinch. It's not necessarily going to be the best, but it'll work a lot of times. So basically we have the router with an end mill in it, and it's actually putting in work, getting us a nice circle cut out of this. I mean, it's a little tedious and time consuming because we've got to basically mill a couple millimeters at a time and then go around a whole nother pass. But I mean, it's getting us a much nicer line and edge than we could get with any of the other cutting tools that we have access to, at least. You know, it's one of those things, man. We're trying to keep this nice and clean and make the best use of it. And time consuming or not, it's working.
Ooh, the satisfaction. Dunzo.
And then we just
some deburn.
nice. So now it was moment of truth time, and unfortunately it still doesn't fit. It's still hitting the timing cover and the timing cover bolts just a little bit. So we marked those out, got some nice transfers. We went ahead and switched all the bolts to Allen bolts just to give us that little bit, you know, it's a game of margins here, you know, and any little bit helps. Any little bit is less we got to grind out of the plate. However, as we were marking the final bits to clear the timing cover, we found another clearance problem, and that is the cylinder head. It sticks out on the LT, so we used some anti-seize to give us basically a nice transfer mark, and had to trace that out, and we're gonna have to mill that out as well. So the router hand mill is definitely coming in absolutely handy. I mean, otherwise we'd have to cut this whole section off, and then we'd have to cover it back with a plate. So if we can make this work, don't get me wrong, it's not going to be easy, but if we can make it work, that's going to be amazing. I will say, doing all this hand milling, it is very satisfying, but it is just kind of further confirming how much I want and need an actual mill, you know, being able to do this on a fixed mill where we could get really precise with it, and, you know, I'm not trying to wrangle it around by hand, would be so incredibly handy. So I mean, as much as it is a little bit tedious, it is extremely satisfying to see these start coming to shape. And we're trying to basically cut as minimal as possible. You know, obviously we could grind a pocket in this whole section and not have to worry about clearing just the specific spots that are sticking out, but you know, where's the fun in that? You know, we might as well try. I mean, again, it's challenging trying to hold this thing, and sometimes it's got a mind of its own when you're using it on aluminum like this. But, you know, the closer we can get to basically just defining the shape that is the clearance problem, then the less we've got to mill away from this mid plate, because this is where a lot of our structure is that's holding the engine in. So after a little bit of time getting them nice and cleaned up, we've got the pockets. It's time to see if we can get this thing to actually bolt on.
That's it, dude. That's touching.
Hit it.
We did it. All right, check it out, yeah, Mike. Whew, that's money in the bank. Shorty, what you drank? Look at all that manual milling. You can't really see it in the video, but it's like this is a pocket, and then it comes up. This is only milled like 2 mil, and then pocketed it for the bolts. Even the smaller bolts needed to be pocketed. Oh my goodness, that was a lot of man milling. But we got a mid plate that fits now with all the bolts.
Worth it.
Worth it. All right, we got our extendo dowels in. Give me a 15 ratchet wrench. Got it right. Suck it, Roldo.
You didn't get it the right direction though. Got him.
You handed it to me in the incorrect direction. Let the record state. Since getting the mid plate on ended up being such an ordeal and an elaborate project and process, we thought, okay, we're good. That's it. That's all we had to do to get this engine in the car. However, we were wrong. We were very mistaken. The dry sump line has a clearance issue with this bracket that's on the frame rail, and basically getting that mid plate to work was, as kind of usual, only a very small part of the battle when it comes to putting this engine in. It's definitely not going to go in as easy as the mock-up block, but you know, we should have figured that. All right, well, swing and a miss on the first engine install. A couple things fighting us. One, the intake manifold being on, which is the whole reason we got this, you know, so we could mock the engine up with the intake on. Problem B is these tabs. I kind of forgot they existed. Presumably they were for the motor plate on the rotary. They looked like they wouldn't be in the way, but being that we have a dry sump and dry sump lines sticking out, there's a lot going on over here. This guy's in the way. I was going to cut them both off, but honestly this one might come in handy to attach something to, so I'll probably leave it, and we'll just chop this off, clean it up, and then the engine should go in. But while it's out, we've already got our CAD, cardboard aided design template here for our, oh wait, this is actually for this one, sorry. It's like, why does this not fit? For our motor plate, this is the one that we've got a clearance around the dry sump pump. Now, it's going to be, it's going to be kind of tricky with the way that plate is. If anything, I would like to make our own thicker, pocketed, blah, 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 but rabbit hole. That is a bridge we will jibber jabber about if we get there. For right now, we've got to modify this plate so that way they both go on. And then all in one combo deal. Motor, front plate's on, engine in. That's the plan. So let's get back to work. While Josue started on hacking up our cardboard template to get a template of how we needed to cut the motor plate to clear around the dry sump pump, I actually did have to still modify this other plate. There's literally nothing over here, so I thought there wouldn't be any problems, but there's a little piece of head gasket and head that are just kind of in the way. And the hand mill Router comes in handy yet again, saves the day yet again, and you know, maybe add some artwork. Couldn't help myself. I'm having too much fun with this thing. It's a whole new world of possibilities. But I did notice that one of these bolts is not going in clean, so I decided to run a tap through it, which usually is a bad sign. It's not bad. It's not bad. I'm just cleaning it up. So you think you could tell? After a nice thorough run through with the tap, getting these threads to be nice and play nice with the bolt, we've got at least one motor plate wing mounted on. Now it's time for the complicated one, and this one is going to take a lot of work. After just getting the cardboard template trim the shape, there's not going to be a ton of motor plate left with the way these things are shaped, which isn't necessarily their problem. It's just, you know, the reality of it, which is why it'd be nice for us to make our own. But we're going to just hack this thing up and get it to fit and then see what it looks like. So one thing about cutting in the bandsaw when you're trying to cut an intricate shape like this is you kind of got to work your way through. You got to cut a piece off to get access to get a good cut line for the next angle, and it's a little bit tricky, and you do end up with kind of an imperfect cut that you got to go back and clean, but still better than doing it with a grinder, which is what I'm using to try to cut this tab off the frame. We definitely don't want to forget about this tab again, and as much as I'm not a fan of using abrasive cutoff disc, there's certain scenarios where there is no substitute, and when you want to get a nice accurate cut, if you're familiar with using one, it's real easy to get a nice clean straight cut around something complicated with a cutoff disc, even though it's not necessarily the most fun. But once that was done, we needed to clean up the motor plate. And now normally we would do this with the belt grinder, but it being as intricate as it is, it was going to be pretty tough to get in there and grind it down. So we decided we're going a little router crazy, I'll be honest. You know, we got the router, we're going to use it, so we decided to clean it up with the router. And then we also, you know, had to anyway basically pocket part of this motor plate as well for where the fitting is on the dry sump pump. So not only are we going around the dry sump pump, but then there is a fitting that is really close to the plate, and we basically got to give ourselves a little pocket so that we have enough clearance for that fitting. And I decided to go back, you know, I'm trying to make it all pretty and clean it up with the pencil die grinder. However, you should never do the finishing touches on something you're trimming until you know it fits, because of course it didn't fit. It didn't fit the first time. Never usually does. Don't know when I'll learn my lesson on that, but we got to go back and do some more grinding. We got to get this pocket a little bit deeper. We've got other pieces to grind, so yeah, you really should wait till it fits to do that little finishing touches, edging stuff. But the reality is, once you bolt it on and it fits, you kind of don't want to take it back off. So, you know, it's kind of a catch-22. But after some more grinding, we've got this thing pretty close. I mean, it kind of bolts on, but it is under a little bit of tension. It's a little tight, and we don't want that. We want this thing to fit perfect. So we went back, did a little bit more trimming, just sneaking up on it, just working our way up to the edge, trying to not take off too much because we can't really easily put material back, but we can always take more away. And I think this one's the time. I think this is it. I think it's going to fit. It was real close before, and fortunately, it had to modify a bolt a little bit, but with that, it actually does fit. All right, well, we got both motor plates on, attached, trimmed, milled. We're not even trimming things anymore, milling things. I even had to modify this bolt here to get past the fitting. This fittings, I basically had to mill most of the plate away. So if we keep these plates, we're for sure going to have to strengthen it on the backside. I would, you know, ideal scenario, I'd like to make our own, you know, one that goes a little bit higher, so then we can cut that out if we need to, and it's not a problem because we have the thickness up here. Granted, we got the mid plate, but anyway, we did order some fittings, some Low Pro banjo fittings, but we would have to use dash 12. This is set up for dash 16 because it's a high vacuum dual return pump. But we'll cross that bridge. We'll talk about the water when we cross that bridge. So that's trimmed. It's mounted. You can see nicely goes around the pump. Look at that. And then this one really didn't take much, but just clearancing for that head gasket. You can see why I had to do that. It's literally perfectly touching at the moment. Even added some writing. We got a pair of motor plates on the front. We got a mid plate on the rear. We may make the mid plate look fancier too, but we have the mounting points on the engine. We have the engine, we have the car, we have that silly, annoying bracket cut off that tried to attack my poor, helpless dry sump lines. And yeah, we've got everything we need. This time, it was a moment of truth. This time, we should have our bases covered. So we have learned. So anyway, let's get this engine tossed in here. Officially hanging in there with the help of the front clamp situation.
Some mile, but not a whole mile.
Actually, first though, that wouldn't work anyway. Whew. Well, I think it's safe to say the hood's not going to fit, but looks sick.
Sure looks pretty cool.
Take a gander. Oh, wow. Wow. Holy cow. That's crazy.
Thing looks like it means business.
Can't wait to cut all the excess off those motor plate wings. Beefy unit. Look how much clearance we have at the bottom. Oh, actually, speaking of, drop her down. It almost makes me want to keep the black wheels. But it's like, I don't hate black wheels, but I feel like these got to be a different color as the tire gets flat. All right, well, today is the day. It's time to finish up this mounting. Oh, I can't get over the sight of seeing that engine sitting in there. What a sight, man. What a sight. Looking snazzy. Let's see what it looks like from the inside. I haven't even taken a gander in here yet. Oh yeah, money in the bank. You can see our extendo dowels, our studs, our motor plates while they are on the engine, and the engine is resting in there. It's temporary because we've got to finish this. So basically, these are way longer than we need them to be. Basically, we need to trim them. The other thing is with the front motor plate, the ideal scenario is you have kind of a shelf that it sits on before it slides back to its mounting point. So that way you can bring the engine in, kind of drop it down on the rails, and then slide it into place, and then bolt it in. Now, the thing is, I don't like the idea of building up some, bent piece of steel or something here to go to this. Like, I don't know, it doesn't sound great. What I'd like to have is like the mid plate has, where it's notched around the tube, sits down on the tube. Now, what I'm gonna do, I think, is use the excess, basically weld it onto the bottom here, and have it notch around the tube, so the front sits down on the tube, and then we'll have our mounting point where it bolts in. Should be pretty clean, pretty sleek, pretty minimalistic, but it's gonna be a bit of work. And I wanna get it done, so we can say that the engine is actually mounted in there. And the good old, that ain't going nowhere. So start marking and cutting and removing and installing, what we've been doing, but just more of it. So let's quit the jibber jabber and get to work so we can get this engine mounted. This is a huge step in the process to have the engine physically mounted in the chassis, because everything else that's the center of everything, So anyway, let's get back to work. Trimming these motor plates isn't just about functionality. Obviously, we need to trim them because they're too long, but we don't want them to look super bulky and unaesthetically pleasing. So I played with a few different lines for cutting them, and this is also partially, or mostly functional, where we need to basically have as much structure as possible to keep it as strong as possible, but also as minimal as possible so that we have plenty of room around them. So came up with kind of a set of angles that I liked, that I thought, accomplished both of those goals. Gave us plenty of structure, but while also ensuring that we didn't, we're not wasting material. It doesn't look very bulky. And also we have tons of room to work around with the headers and all of that stuff that we're going to need to build, because these engine bays will fill up a lot faster than you think. So speaking of wood tools for metal, this is a wood saw, but it works just fine to cut aluminum. I mean, it's a little sketchy. I used to work in an aluminum fabrication shop, and I would do the cutting sometimes, and I definitely had some pieces go flying across the shop room. So as much as I don't love using this method, it is a lot easier to get a nice, perfectly straight, good finish cut than it is with the bandsaw. There's always those little jiggles and wobbles with the bandsaw because you're cutting it by hand. So I'm kind of, this is calculated risk to cut these pieces as much as possible with this miter saw, so that way, we get that nice finish that we're going for. We put a lot of time into these plates so far, and, I want to carry it through the goal line and, make Josue proud with his trimming and marking for around the dry sump pump. And, it's just, there's times like this when you're towards the end of a project that you put a lot of time into, and you could rush it here and it almost could ruin the whole result. So we've really got to take our time here and stick with the old motto of sneaking up on it. So we've basically got our lines marked of where exactly our tube is, use a straight edge to do that. And now we've got our extended pieces, which just kind of works out because the extended pieces are what have to get notched to the tube. So we can notch the pieces, and then if it doesn't work, we have enough material, we can remake those pieces, and we're not messing up the entire plate. So it's a little less risky, a little low risk comparatively. Now, we're using the belt grinder with these notch attachments to do this, and the tricky part here is, the attachments are different sizes, 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. We're going to 1.5 inch tube. But the problem is when you're grinding with an 1.5 inch roller, sometimes you can overshoot it because you can move around a little bit or the thickness of the belt. So this first one I got notched, and it fit, but it was just a little big. And would it have worked? Absolutely. In a pinch, if I had done that to the main piece, we could have made it work. But I didn't. So I made another piece, and we're going to notch this one with the roller size down, the 1.25 inch, which with the belt and everything should be about right. And fortunately, we got it spot on. And this is super critical, not only notch-wise, but height-wise, because we've got the engine jacked up to kind of a neutral load point where it's not pushing up against the midplate, but it's not pulling down against the midplate, because if we built these with it pulling down, then all the load's on the midplate anyway. They're not going to do anything. So getting these just right is critical to making this all work and share the load, Boom. That's it. What a satisfying one to get those fit. Oof, especially this one. This one was tricky. I do need to notch this right here for this line. It's a little tight at the moment. I'm gonna go ahead and grind a pretty deep V on each piece on each side, so that way we can kind of fill it with weld and ideally grind it back flush but keep all our weld structure. That is my plan. Weld it and then see what we got. But man, that looks so much better than it did with the giant wings on there. Really, really happy with that. Looks so good in there. Oh, love this, man. I miss fabricating. Oh, all right, let's get back to work. So while the belt grinder was still set up in notching mode, I wanted to go ahead and notch this spot for that line. I could have done this without it in the notcher mode, but since it was already there, hey, it made it easy. And fortunately, this Ameriberry belt grinder switches back and forth really quickly. Sometimes I'll not want to switch it, but then I remember how easy it is. It's not bad. So we use the Scotch-Brite belt to grind basically some deep bevels into this, because we want this weld, we want this to be like as if it's almost all one piece. And fortunately, we have a welding table, because if we didn't, this would be really tricky. We need to keep these absolutely flat, and that is going to be the biggest challenge here. Welding it, not a big deal, getting all that done, not that tough, but making sure this stays flat requires it to be clamped to a flat surface. I had some gross spots that popped up while I was welding, but the trickier part was welding the backside, because now the weld's sticking up, so you can't just clamp it flat to the table. You're going to be bowing it, so we had to use some spacer leftover pieces underneath to clamp it down flat and then get the weld on the backside and the welds around. But fortunately, you know, we've got the method, and overall it went pretty well. I did mock up the smaller piece just because I ground my bevels a little deep, and I wanted to make sure that it was still fitting right. We didn't have that factory edge to line up with, but all was well. So clamped it up, welded out both sides of it, and we got a pair of pieces that hopefully will work. And again, keep this engine in a neutral load position where the mid plate and the motor plate are both carrying the weight. Not one, not the other. That's the goal here. That's what's so tricky about it. Moment of truth. Look at that, dude. Weight is on the bars. So you can see, like, car starts to lift first. Hell yeah. Obviously, we still got to build the mounts bolted in, but that makes it so much nicer for getting it in and out, because we'll basically, you know, lift it just a little bit, and then we can take it out. When we're putting it in, we can basically set it on both the motor and the mid plate. I mean, we could realistically unbolt the mid plate right now. The motor would still sit pretty still, and you could almost slide it forward because it's almost resting on the bars, both at the mid plate and at the front here. So it's like double security.
Right. No, it's beautiful.
This one obviously will get trimmed for the alternator. It needs to get trimmed because it looks kind of silly. But I don't want to trim it until we have the alternator. But
Still to be continued. It's a work in progress.
yo,
But it's sitting there.
it's sitting there, man. It's supported now. Pretty satisfying. With the motor plates all shaped up, the final step is building a mounting point into the chassis. And this is where all these compromises come into play, because these pieces of square tubing that we're using are a little bit thicker and heavier than I would like. But the reality is we want it to be strong, and that's kind of always a trade-off. Strong versus light. Simple versus stout, you know, it's tough, and maybe I'll regret this. These are a little on the heavy side, but they're small, but that stuff does add up. Now, another thing is serviceability. We could have just drilled a through hole and bolted these in with bolts and nuts, but I want this to be as serviceable as possible. I tried to do that with anything I build, but especially a race car, because you're going to be working on it at the track. And the difference between having to, you know, reach around and try to get a wrench back there on a nut and actually just bolting in and out of something threaded, it's night and day. And those things compound and make things way easier to work on. So that being said, welding them into the chassis is its own animal. You know, when you get used to welding things on a bench, welding into the chassis is always, it's kind of like stepping outside of your element. You know, you've got more things, more variables to deal with. You can't just get the piece exactly where you want it, and you can't get yourself right where you want it, and you're dealing with generally older material that's dirty and maybe been painted and cleaned and painted and got grease on it, and it just makes things a lot more complicated. So this really is the trickiest part of this whole process, is welding these into the chassis and making sure they're in the exact right spot to do the sharing the load. You know, it's important that we're sharing the load here between the motor plate and the mid plate, and getting these welded on in the right spot, keeping the holes lining up, all of that is a huge part in that. All right, well, we got them all welded on. Very tricky. You look at it and you always think you got plenty of room to get in there until you go to get in there, especially this one. Obviously, we could have pulled the engine and all that, but I was like, there's enough room. It was just tight having to go left-handed on this back one, but they're in there. I mean, obviously, we will have to pull, the engine will come in and out many times, I'm sure, and it'll have to come back out for us to paint this, but we've got to clean up other parts of the frame and paint that anyway. But for now, they are welded in. Time to see if the plates still fit. I couldn't get as many tacks on here as I would like. You know, if you've only got like 2 tacks on one side, it's real easy for it to warp one way or another. Well, as I kind of expected, because I couldn't get good tacks with everything bolted together and just, you know, just kind of part of it with welding stuff, it warps even in the best case scenario. We did have to open up the holes a tiny bit, but we started with them just large enough to fit the bolt, which is what I like to do. So opening them up to kind of a standard hole size and the plates bolted right on. All right, boom, engine mounted, mid-plated and motor plated. You can see you got it to where it's just on the bolt instead of it all resting on the bar here. That way the load is onto the mount instead of being put onto, you know, where these are sitting basically. But yeah, wow. Seems like that was a long project. I still do want to weld a piece on the back here, but I'm gonna probably wait until we see how those fittings fit, because we might be able to kind of fill that area back in or something like that. I want to just see first before we go hog wild, literally and figuratively. But that ain't going nowhere. Say it.
That ain't going nowhere.
There you go.
Solid. Nice work.
Here, send it on up. Let's send it the rest of the way up. We never looked under this thing with an engine in it. Whew, wild.
Miles of space.
Yeah, I know, literally all the, like this bar is taking up a ton of space blocking the view, but that's just to hold the wheels together, but.
Wow, I didn't notice the LED.
Oh yeah, it's fancy, dude. Fancy pan. Fancy pans. Yeah, I'll be able to get our torque converter bolts easy through here. We'll probably have to do, you know, we'll see where the starter lands. We still gotta notch this for that. I need to fill this in. I'll probably cut a piece to match and just weld it in. And then we'll need to build a little cover plate, at least for the main bulk of it down here. But with the dry sump, look at all this room for activities. We couldn't run a rear sump with this rack. We'd have to move the rack forward, and then the rear sump would be well below the frame rails. Even with the engine up as high as it is, and, you know, much prefer it this way. What a sight. What a sight for sore arms from wrestling myself in there. It's in there like swimwear. Official. Can't change our minds now. Well, it is mounted. There ain't no going back. Even though it's dark out, we gotta do it. Yeah, I mean, it just hits different, dude.
For sure.
I'm real happy with this motor plate for what we had to work with, you know? Yeah, it's legit now, I'll tell you what. That's a whole LT and a whole RX7. Wow.
We got a baseline.
We got a baseline. We got a chassis and an engine in the chassis.
Official.
Yeah, it's legit.
Ain't coming out.
We have one other piece to, you know, just get an idea of what we're working with here aesthetically. Such a nice piece. All the billet. So much billet. But you know what? Actually, there is one more piece of billet I've got to show you guys. Full billet transmission. Sequential. All billet. But I mean, it just matches so nice. Couldn't help. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just a courier. One friend's buying it from another friend. I've actually never seen one of these up close and personal. And I gotta say, man, it's a nice piece, but it does look nice. Compliments it. But yeah, no, we're staying auto. Power by, 2-speed, simple. I just thought that was funny that we happened to have it at the time we're putting this engine in. So anyway, I think that is gonna be a wrap, guys. Man, it was definitely a project getting this engine mounted. There was a lot of challenges. Cutting, trimming, shaping, mounting, extending. But I'm stoked, man. I'm real happy we went this route. Like I said, it should still come together fast. I got my flanges should actually be here tomorrow to start building the headers, and I have everything else. So we are cruising right along, let me tell you. So anyway, that being said, on that note, I'm gonna go ahead and end it here. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. I'm sure most of you will be happy to see us going all in on this one. Which means now the only downside is obviously then we don't have a nice ready to go engine sitting up on the loft for the all-wheel drive build, which we do still plan on doing, and sooner rather than later. But the upside is we've got a lot to do to the Miata, and we may be picking up a new engine for it tomorrow as well. So that's a whole project. But then also not having an engine sitting there gives us an excuse to put together a new engine. Anyway, more to come on that. Yeah, guess I should quit jibber jabbering and end it out. So any closing thoughts, Josue?
I'm excited per usual.
Yeah.
We're making headway.
Yeah, it's got an engine and a transmission. I couldn't help myself. I'm not one of those people. The timing was just, I couldn't miss out on the trolling you guys. But anyway, yeah, okay. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. I'm sure I'll see you next time. Goodbye, guys. And I trolled you guys too. I was like, look at my new transmission. I couldn't help it.